Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Matt Storrs, and welcome to Mattsplaining. On today's episode, I have an expert on who I'm very excited to speak with. Expert, please introduce yourself and tell us what you're an expert in.
Hey Matt, I'm Patrick Holbert. I'm so happy to be here today to talk about recovery from drugs and alcohol. I am a sober person. I've been sober for 15 years, coming up on 16. So I don't know that I'm an expert or I can claim expertise in it, but I have a lot of experience. I also actually, one of my jobs, I work in the recovery field as a sober coach. So I'm here to talk about recovery.
Absolutely fantastic. I feel like I know quite a bit about the recovery process. And I think that one of the things that people often overlook is the idea that you have to go into a program. You have to go into a 12-step program and you have to go through the steps and do every single one of them. And I think that sometimes some of those steps can make things a little bit more difficult for the people in your life. For instance, going and apologizing to somebody who you really seriously wronged, or like it was a very toxic situation that can create some problems. But I think that one of the things that people often overlook, mostly because the fad has come and gone multiple times, is that the chip system in the AA, NA, what have you, is actually has its roots in POGs, if you remember POGs. And
Uh, yeah.
and so the chips that you would get for 1 week sobriety, a year sobriety, what have you, they actually were used as slammers, and they were really, or chippers, if you played by those rules, and they were really, really effective. And
Yeah.
you could see, and people were like, "Oh, we don't like the idea of recovery being brought into our public schools and with this fad so readily." And so they tried to adapt it and trying to dissuade kids from bringing in their parents' recovery chips and using them by creating a whole market of hog makers and the metal slammers and basically getting alternatives. But no matter how much you got into it, whether you got into competitive play or just like you were that one kid that was really good, they would always have a recovery chip in their case. And that's how you knew somebody was going to be really good. And I think that that highlights one of the primary aspects of recovery that people often overlook, is that recovery gives so much more space to somebody to fill their life with new opportunities and things that are away from drugs and alcohol, and
hmm
finding new passions. And I think that a lot of people, when they first get into it, they think like, oh, they associate those substances and that use with the things that they enjoy. And oh, I would never be able to enjoy a concert without being a little high or being a little stoned or what have you. But then you realize, like, oh, there's aspects of the concert that I really enjoy that I'm going to appreciate more when I am sober. And it's not going to be a trigger for me to want to use. And then finding new things of like, oh, I enjoy going to these concerts. Maybe I'll enjoy taking up the bass guitar. And
hmm
a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of bass guitarists are actually in recovery because they've realized that, oh, this ability to create a bass and like keep the music going is really what drew them to music in the first place. And like it gets that repetitive beat and that, for lack of a better term, that bass, and they can feel it in their soul, and it gives that reverberation and that kind of deep down feeling of joy and creative fulfillment. And so, like, a lot of people find the bass to be really cathartic if they're going through recovery, especially in the early stages. For a long time, there were a set of guitar shops that specifically targeted AA groups and NA groups, trying to market and sell to them. And they had to be, pushed away and like, hey, let the people come to you through time. You can't do all this direct advertising to our members. It's been kind of unethical. But I think that people, it doesn't have to be the bass guitar. It doesn't have to be pogs. It doesn't have to be any of these things. It could be running. It could be finding something that it doesn't have to be necessarily like a fill-in for that experience that you were having before, but something that just gives you fulfillment and helps you reconnect with who you are and what you prioritize and what you care about. And if that's
Sure.
Pogs and making Pogs more popular, I got a whole stack in some Tupperware here, and I'm ready to go. I'm ready to. I've collected a number of my friends, family members, AA chips, and I got some of the best slammers you can ever imagine.
Have you
Uh,
heard of people gambling with these chips at all?
yeah, so I mean, technically, Pogs was a form of gambling, and I think that there have been instances where people have gone to casinos. People fill in one addiction for another, and saying like, okay, well, I can't use alcohol anymore, but I can become obsessed with and addicted to gambling, which is a very easy gateway. There have been instances where casinos will honor those sobriety chips and say the more time you have in, the more money you get. They're gonna, I think the most, if they are gonna approve it, it's gonna be about $20 per year in most places. So you if you need to find some gambling to do, you might be able to get a fair amount of money for it. But they are gonna insist that you stay and gamble as much of that money away as possible. Now, Patrick, based on what you've heard so far, how much of that would you say was accurate?
I have to part so much of recovery and the 12 step program is rigorous honesty. And
Hmm.
if I need to be rigorously honest, very little of it was true, but it
Okay,
was all very entertaining
good.
and compelling. And actually you might be onto something with some of these ideas.
Okay, okay,
But thank you so much for
absolutely.
sharing what of it. And actually, thinking of the casino, I mean, the casino idea is hilarious. There is a bar in the East Village. I don't even know if this is an urban legend in the recovery community, but there's this bar called the 13th Step.
Okay.
I'm sure you've walked past there, that allegedly will accept a sober coin, like an AA chip or whatever. If you give them that, they will give you your first drink free. Like
Oh, wow.
they'll celebrate your relapse, essentially. I don't know anybody who's actually done it, but I've heard that story repeatedly.
Mm,
So I assume it's true. But yeah, Pogs, I have not thought of Pogs in so long. And I
mhm.
had a phase probably around fifth or sixth grade. I'm 43. I don't know if the math lines up, but I remember being so obsessed with Pogs and collecting the slammers and yeah, they were called Pogs.
Yeah.
And now it's very funny to think of how I am now hoping to acquire more and more of this new circular currency in my recovery as I move along.
There is
Yeah.
something about human beings and receiving circular like tokens that we really, really like, I feel.
Yes. Yes, totally. Oh, and by the way, I would give as inaccurate as your tangents on what recovery is or can be, I will give you an A plus gold star coin for your what you did say because it was just so fun to listen to. So
Thank you.
style points, A plus, accuracy, I gotta go with an F.
Okay, that's totally
For
fine.
although it wasn't, there's obviously based on a lot of truth in there.
Mhm.
Something about the romance of this coin system that I'll say is that you don't keep them, or it's encouraged to not keep them. It's sort of
Mm,
like when you get your next year or your next batch of months or whatever, and you get a new coin, you return the old coin into the box or the ecosystem. I have a buddy, I'll never forget this meeting where I'd known him for years, but he always struggled to maintain continuous sobriety. So
mhm,
he would always collect a coin when he got 90 days, and it became a pattern for him where he would relapse, but he'd always come back, which is great. And
mhm.
a lot of people criticize 12-step recovery because it puts too much of an emphasis on continuous time, which I sort of
Right.
agree with because some of this is so challenging. Anyway, I remember when he got a year or 2 years or something, he went on stage to celebrate and he brought all of his 90-day coins and it looked like he had just won at the roulette table. It was a
Oh, that's
huge
wild.
stack of chips. And he said, I'm here to return these to the group. And it was this beautiful moment that has so many, yeah, parallels to gambling or pogs or whatever. It's just funny to think of stacks and stacks of coins like that.
That's a beautiful image. I'm happy that they were able to do that.
Yeah. And yeah, I kept some notes here. I love the idea of going out and working the steps, actually creating more problems in the world, going back into people's lives and apologizing to them. And what you hit on there is a funny thing or an interesting thing that when you read the literature of these programs, it says step 8 is we make a list of people we'd harmed and we become willing to go make amends to them. And
Hmm.
then step 9 is actually going and making those amends. And it says, unless doing the amends would cause more harm. So there is this concept of making living amends, which means instead of going to the person and saying, hey, I'm sorry I cheated on you when we were together, or I'm sorry I character assassinated you to all your friends, instead of saying these things to a person who, when they would hear something like that, might make their life more unpleasant or difficult,
Hmm.
you just do a what's called a living amends, which means you amend that behavior, you move forward in your life, and you don't treat people like that, and you do it sort of with that pattern or that person in mind, without re-entering their life and making it uncomfortable or re-traumatizing or upsetting them in some way. So
Right.
you're actually onto something that sometimes making an amends to people can be problematic.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I can see that being difficult in a lot of people's situations.
Yeah. And then, yeah, back to the gambling thing. I will say it's very common for people to engage other addictions and other thrill-seeking behaviors. My drinking was very linked to thrill-seeking. I grew up skateboarding and jumping off bridges and staying out late and doing crazy stuff on bikes and rollerblades. And I didn't start drinking until I was in college at 18
Hmm.
because I was sort of like, well, I need a new way to feel something. So I drank for 9 years, and that's what it was based on. It was, I want to get drunk and do crazy stuff, and I want people to tell stories about me. And then when I got sober at 27, yeah, I had to figure out how to use that energy and get thrills in other ways. And I think that's a big reason why I'm a performer now. I did get into playing music. That was so funny about the bass also.
Hmm.
It's funny you mention bass players specifically in recovery because you
Hmm.
made me think about 20, who one of the principles of the recovery I do at least is you don't like out other people. So I can't really say any of them off the top of my head who I don't know whether or not they talk about it publicly or not. But I always wanted to learn how to play drums. And
Okay.
my first year sober, I was not hungover at all the time, and I wasn't drunk all the time, and I had all this free time. So I took drum lessons and I finally learned how to play. And some buddies of mine from the program said, "Hey, we have a band and we need a drummer." And I said, "Well, I don't know how to play. I've just learned." And they said, "Well, it's punk rock. You don't need to know how to play."
Beautiful.
And it was great. It was like a year and a half of playing shows and learning how to play in a band. And yeah, performing in front of people is a thrill. And yeah, sort of that replacement high, if you will. I feel so lucky I never did get really excited by gambling because that can totally mess up things for people in sobriety.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's very lucky that gambling is so difficult and
Yeah.
you need to be able to get in there with some investment. So yeah, it can be definitely detrimental, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, yeah, I love that you talked about going to concerts and finding the beauty and the excitement in an everyday situations to just like enjoy yourself without getting drunk or high. And by the way, something I always try to remember to say is like not everyone needs to be abstinent from drugs or
Hmm.
alcohol. This, I think the stats are is about 1 in 10 people probably have addiction issues
Hmm.
and can't safely drink or use like other people. But with that said, if you're listening and you think maybe I'm one of 10 of those people, you can have so much fun in sobriety. It you don't quit drinking or drugs and become a monk. You find other things that are interesting to you, and you can have a great time in any environment, at any concert or show or sporting event, whatever, wherever it looks like you have to be drunk to be doing that thing. Traveling is a big one. People obsess about, well, how am I going to travel if I can't drink the way I like to drink? Trust me, there's ways to do it. It takes some practice sometimes, but it can be a really fulfilling and fun life without it.
Absolutely. The folks that I know that are in sobriety, it's always a beautiful thing to get in initially, and there's some struggles and everything like that, but like the joy that gets behind their eyes when they start finding those things that like real like come in and they can really have enjoyment for those
Yeah.
things, and like just like the excitement and thrill that they have of like, oh, I can do this thing and it's my thing and I don't have to worry about like where my BAC is or how many edibles, whatever it would be. And it's just like that, it fills me with joy to see them so happy.
Yeah, that's great. That's amazing that you're such a good ally to your friends because that's big too, is like finding a social network that makes sense and works for your new lifestyle because it can become such a paradigm shift for people. And
Mhm.
in the first year or so, it feels kind of insane. Like, I mean, for me, it always felt like, well, that was my whole identity. I was the party guy. Like, who am I now? And it really took me a while to figure out that I was so much, I can be so much more than just the party guy.
Absolutely. Patrick, this has been so insightful for me, and I hope for listeners as well. If people wanted to learn more about sobriety or more about you, where would you recommend they go?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Matt. And I learned a lot from you being Mattsplained to about what I've been doing for the last 15 and a half years.
Yeah, I'm happy to help.
Uh, and yeah, if a listener wants to know more about it, I would definitely recommend there's a lot of pop culture that people could take in. That Dak Shepard has a podcast where he talks very openly about being in recovery. I think he makes it very accessible for people. There's various films that people can watch. I actually have a comedy special coming out
Mhm.
that is just on the theme of why I had to get sober and what my life is like now. And I'm excited for people to see that. But yeah, you could also just, oh, here's a big one I would
Okay.
recommend. If you really think you might have an issue and you want to know what life could be like, go on Reddit. There's a subreddit called Stop Drinking, and there's a subreddit called Alcoholics Anonymous.
Hmm.
Both of those online communities are so great, and I visit them often. People just openly talk about how they're navigating sobriety or making the decision to quit or whatever. And it's a lot of just like people connecting and sharing their experience with each other. So, yeah, anything and everything you might want to know about is on there. And yeah, I'm always happy to, if somebody's having a problem and they want to know, they want to ask me for advice, I'm always happy to help however I can. And I'm on Instagram. My last name is Holbert, but my Instagram handle is the Holbert Report. Um,
Wonderful.
riding the coattails of a 10-year-old joke at this point. Uh, and yeah, that's where I do all my communicating about what I'm up to, shows, and when the special comes out, I'll put it out, put the information on there. And my website, I'm actually trying to update more often on the blog, which is patrickholbert.com.
Absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate you joining me and for sharing all of that information. I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you, Matt. This was really fun.
Wonderful. My name is Matt Storrs, and this has been Mattsplaining. Before we go today, I want to thank Ryan Lawson, my dear friend, for making the theme music for Mattsplaining. Ryan can be reached at beatblenderstudios@gmail.com or at Beat Blender Studios on Instagram and TikTok.